Hi there, welcome to this video. So we're going through the biological molecules questions, and this is part 3 on the water and ions section. Question 14. Water molecules are transported in the stem of a sunflower. Okay, so let's get green if we're in a plant. It's hitting on the cable, sorry, I just moved my thing across. So inside the stem of our sunflower, sunflower at the top here, looking beautiful. So inside the stem of the sunflower, we've got water molecules going up. Now, the little tubes in the stem that transport water molecules up are called the xylem. Okay, and the water molecules are going to be transported up the xylem. So these are our water molecules going up the xylem, up the stem. Okay, so water molecules are polar, and therefore they are attracted to each other. Draw two water molecules and label the bond between the two molecules. So we should know, hopefully, that water is H2O, so it's two hydrogens, one oxygen, like that. The next thing we should know is that they're polar, therefore the hydrogens are slightly positive. This is the little symbol for slightly, and the oxygen is slightly negative. Now we should know that slightly positive and slightly negative parts of molecules are attracted to one another. So if we've got another water molecule just here, slightly positive, slightly positive, slightly negative, the negative, slightly negative charge on the oxygen and slightly positive charge of the hydrogen will be attracted to one another, and you'll get a hydrogen bond in between them. And you're going to draw hydrogen bonds as dotted lines or dashed lines, and that bond is called a hydrogen bond. So each of the water molecules in the xylem, in the stem of the sunflower, are all held together by these hydrogen bonds. That's what holds the water molecules together. Make sure on that question that you did actually label the hydrogen bond, and it is going between an oxygen and between a hydrogen. Right, the next question. Explain how the properties of water are related to the transport role of water in the stem. Okay, so how does water get transported up the stem? We've got two different words that we can use in this context. One of them is called cohesion, and one of them is called adhesion, and they mean slightly different things. So first of all, cohesion is when two molecules of the same type stick together. So this is the water molecules sticking together. So water sticks to water. Okay, so water molecules are attracted to one another. Now, in the xylem, in the stem of the plant, you get a continuous column of water. If you got a little bubble in it, that would really, really affect how well it could pull the water up the stem. You need all the water molecules to be touching one another, all stuck together by cohesion. So if the ones at the top are moving up the stem, it pulls the ones lower down up behind it. Okay. Now the adhesion is slightly different. So let's just finish this. Sorry. Continuous column of water pulls the chain of water molecules up the stem. Okay, so that's cohesion. Let's just change colour for adhesion. So adhesion means something slightly different. Adhesion means different things sticking together. Okay, so in this example, the water molecules will stick to the sides of the xylem. All right, so cohesion means two things that are the same sticking together. Adhesion means two things that are different sticking to each other. So the adhesion happening here is that the water molecules are attracted to the sides of the xylem. Okay, now this allows something to happen called capillary action. Now we haven't looked at this yet at this stage in the course, but if you're ready to learn that phrase, then brilliant. It just allows that to happen. The final thing that is worth a mark, which is probably, to be fair, what you would have written first rather than third, is that for transport of water in a stem, it's really important that it's a solvent. Okay, so it's a solvent, which means that various different things dissolve in water. Water is the thing that other things dissolve into. So if you remember, if we had a beaker of water and the sugar molecules dissolve in the water, the sugar is what we call the solute, is the thing that dissolves, whereas the water is what it dissolves in, that's the solvent, and together they make a solution. Yeah, so the water is a solvent. Other molecules can dissolve in water. So, for example, so we can say molecules dissolve in water. And an example is sucrose. Now, most of the time, glucose isn't transported around a plant as glucose. Normally, glucose molecules stick together with other molecules, and they're transported as disaccharides like sucrose, things like that. Okay, you could say ions. So ions dissolve in it to be transported around in the xylem as well. Now, if it was carrying sucrose, this is kind of another level linking on to year 13. If sugars are dissolved in the water, then that's carried in the phloem, whereas if ions are dissolved in the water, then that's carried in the xylem. So the xylem transports water and mineral ions, whereas the phloem, I say phloem for food, the sugar's the food, isn't it, of the plant? So the phloem would transport if it was sucrose. So just be careful with your language, but all that detail will come together as we move through the course. Okay. Question number 15 is about the properties of water in living organisms. So, water has many important roles in living organisms. State the name of the bond that holds water molecules together. Nice and easy, hydrogen bonds. That's what we've talked about in the previous question. DNA is one of many substances that will dissolve in water. Explain why water is a good solvent. So we haven't learnt that water specifically dissolves in water, but we have learnt that water is a solvent and a little bit about that. Now remember always that your water molecules are polar, so the hydrogens are slightly positive, the oxygen is slightly negative, and we've talked about how ions, such as positive ions, can dissolve in water. So if you've got a positive ion, what will happen is the water molecules will surround it like this, with the oxygen attracted to the positive ion, because oxygen is slightly negative. It's the oxygen that will go on to the positive ion. Likewise, we've said that if you had a negative ion, it could still dissolve in water, because then the hydrogens would stick to it and the water molecules would surround it in that way. Okay, so that's what we've learned, and now it's a case of looking at this question and applying what we know to a new context. So they've asked us to explain that DNA is one of many substances that dissolves in water. Explain why water is a good solvent. So it's going to use the same theory that we've learnt in our other examples. So first of all, we need to say that the water molecules are, spelling. Don't even know how to have out one here. Maybe if I just select it, delete it, there we go. So the molecules are polar. That's the reason why things dissolve in water, because the water molecules are polar. If you've got a molecule that's polar or has a charge, then what happens is that the water molecules will bind to that solute. Okay, they'll be attracted to that solute, they'll bind to that solute, they'll surround that solute, and hence the solute dissolves in the water. Okay, so water molecules are attracted to the solute molecules. Now, when you get questions about it being a good solvent, try and use the right language. So up here, I just talked you through the simplest example of sugar and water. Now the sugar's the solute, the water's the solvent. So whatever dissolves in the water is called a solute, and when they're together, they're solutions. So just bear that language in mind and try and use that language of, like in that one there, we talked about solute. So try and use that word. Okay. Part 3, a student studied the pack of plant food supplied with some cut flowers. The list of ions included hydrogen and sodium. Suggest what roles they might play in the helping of cut flowers to last longer. Now, there's a whole list of ions, and I'm afraid you just have to remember what those ions do. It's really hard, I know. As we go through the course, it gets easier, but for now, it is just a memorizing activity. So, hydrogen ions can be used to regulate pH. So the whole pH scale from acid up to base. Basically, acids are mostly H plus ions, bases are mostly hydroxyl ions, OH minus, and if you've got halfway in between half H plus, half OH minus, it's neutral, and there's just a whole scale of that. So what do H plus ions do? They make things more acidic, so they regulate pH. Sodium ions are used to regulate the water potential. Okay, so water potential is it's a little bit like water concentration. It's the potential of water, of how much pressure they put on the surrounding surfaces. It regulates the water potential, and I'm afraid for now you've just got to memorize what those ions do. We don't know which ions they're going to pick out to ask you about. Number 16, outline the properties of water that make it an ideal habitat for an amphibian. So an amphibian is an organism that can live in water and on land. Okay, first of all, that's what amphibian actually means. But why is it good for organisms to live in? So we could say that there's lots of things you could say. It's only 2 marks, you don't need to say all of these, but you could say that it's a solvent. You could say that the temperature stays quite constant, stays relatively constant. So like in a pond, that's really useful. And the reason it does that is because it's got a really high specific heat capacity. You need a lot of energy to change the temperature by a small amount. Okay, so actually the temperature of the pond stays more constant than the temperature of the air does. For example, in the pond as well, you could say about how the ice floats. So the reason why ice floats on a pond is because water has a higher density than ice. So the water density is higher than the density of ice, and therefore ice floats and it forms this like insulating layer on the top of the pond to help organisms to live in the water. Okay. Number 17, water has many properties that are essential for living organisms. Explain out the properties relating to density of water contribute to the survival of organisms. So it's a very similar question. All the density questions are going to be, properties of water questions are going to be really similar. So we could say again that ice is less dense than water. And therefore the ice floats. And that insulates the water underneath. Some organisms might actually live in the water. You could say about how it's actually could be a habitat for some organisms live in the ice. Sorry, the ice on top of the water. You could instead talk about how the density of water allows oxygen and nutrients to circulate. Water's got a similar density to living organisms. Organisms can float in the water. I'm not going to write all that down because it's very, very similar. They did allow that, but it's much kind of less traditional answer, less common answer. It's much more likely that you'd think, right, density, ice is less dense than water, therefore the ice floats, therefore it insulates the water underneath, so the animals can continue to live in the water underneath without too much variation in temperature. Okay, that's probably where your answer would go. Number 18, again, back to the ions again, which I've said you're going to have to just learn. Sorry about that. Put those on the next page so you can see them all in one go. The table shows the chemical symbols for some inorganic ions involved in biological processes. Which row gives the correct chemical symbols for all of these inorganic ions? So some of the ions are called organic. That just means they contain carbon. Some of them are inorganic. That simply means that they don't contain carbon. So first of all, this question is just asking you what are the correct symbols. So the correct row is C, because ammonium is NH4+, calcium is Ca2+, and nitrates are NO3-. The font of these has gone a little bit funny. That's C. The 2+ goes up there. It would have printed right in your exam paper. Apologies, the font's just gone funny on this document. Number 19, plant seedlings were grown in a solution that contained various dissolved ions. The table below lists two of the functions of these ions in the seedlings. Complete the table below with the formula of each ion. So you can see that not only do you need to know what each ion does, but you do need to learn the formulas as well. So the first one supplies elements that form part of the structure of amino acids and nucleotides. So they're looking for nitrates, and the formula will be NO3-, and forms part of the structure of DNA and phospholipids. They're looking for the phosphate group. So that's PO4 and the charge 3-. Okay, so you've got to learn that list of ions and what the ions are all used for. Okay, we'll finish the video there and I'll do a new video for the lipids section of the paper.